The rhythmic beep of the heart monitor was the only sound piercing the heavy silence of Trauma Bay 4. For 6 agonizing hours, a 70-pound Belgian Malinois named Titan had held the entire military medical staff hostage. He stood over the motionless, shattered form of Chief Petty Officer Colin Hayes, teeth bared in a silent snarl, an unyielding sentinel guarding his fallen handler. Heavily armed military police stood by, tranquilizer rifles trembling in their sweat-slicked hands, completely out of options. The veteran doctors had given up. Then, a 23-year-old rookie nurse, hands shaking, stepped past the barricade. She didn't carry a weapon. She carried a secret, etched permanently into her skin. The concrete tarmac of Landstuhl Regional Medical Center in Germany was no stranger to tragedy, but the chill that rolled off the incoming C-17 Globemaster that Tuesday evening felt distinctly heavier than usual. It was 1800 hours, and the grey twilight was doing nothing to soften the harsh, strobing emergency lights of the waiting ambulances. Inside the aircraft's cavernous belly lay the grim aftermath of a classified Tier 1 operation in the Horn of Africa, gone completely sideways. Dr. Harrison Miller, a trauma surgeon with 15 years of experience pulling shrapnel out of the bodies of young men and women, stood at the head of the receiving line. Beside him was Beatrice Gable, the veteran head nurse who ran the trauma bays with an iron fist. They watched as the ramp lowered, releasing the smell of ozone, diesel fuel, and burnt Kevlar into the frigid German air. "Patient is Chief Petty Officer Colin Hayes," the flight medic shouted over the dying whine of the jet engines, jogging alongside the reinforced gurney as it was wheeled down the ramp. 32 years old, multiple gunshot wounds to the torso, massive blunt force trauma from a secondary IED blast. We had to induce a coma over the Atlantic. His ICP is spiking, and his core temp is dropping. Dr. Miller's eyes scanned the pale, ash-covered face of the Navy SEAL. Hayes was a giant of a man, even in his diminished, broken state. But it wasn't the severity of his injuries that caused the receiving team to instinctively take a step back. It was the shadow moving beneath the gurney. Tethered to the metal frame by a frayed, dust-caked tactical leash was a massive Belgian Malinois. The dog, bearing the call sign Titan on his shredded tactical vest, was limping heavily on his right hind leg. A deep gash crossed his snout, but his amber eyes were wide, dilated, and burning with an intensity that made the hair on Dr. Miller's arms stand up. Whoa, hold up," Dr. Miller said, raising a hand. "Get the handler to secure the K9. We can't bring an active combat dog into the sterile bay like this." The flight medic's face tightened. "He doesn't have a handler, Doc. Hayes is his handler. The backup handler took a sniper round to the neck on exfil. He's dead. This dog hasn't left Hayes' side since the dust-off. We tried to crate him in the bird, and he nearly tore a crew chief's arm off. We need to get this man into Bay 4 right now," Beatrice barked, ignoring the dog and stepping forward to grab the IV lines. The moment her hand crossed an invisible threshold, Titan lunged. The dog didn't bark. He moved with the terrifying silent efficiency of a trained killer. His jaws snapped shut mere millimeters from Beatrice's forearm, the force of his teeth clicking together, echoing sharply over the tarmac. He hit the end of the leash with a violent jerk, planting his front paws firmly over Hayes' boots, dropping his head low, and emitting a deep, resonant growl that seemed to vibrate through the concrete. "Back off!" the flight medic yelled, pulling Beatrice away. "I'm telling you, he's in full protective drive. He thinks we're the threat." They managed to wheel the gurney into Trauma Bay 4, only because Titan allowed forward movement, walking defensively beneath the rolling bed. But the moment they locked the wheels and attempted to transfer Hayes to the surgical table, the real nightmare began. Titan chewed through the frayed nylon of his leash in 3 seconds flat. Freed from the restraint, he immediately vaulted onto the bed, straddling Hayes' shattered legs. He didn't bite, but he established a definitive, unbreachable perimeter. Any sudden movement, any approach closer than 5 feet, was met with a terrifying display of bared fangs and aggressive posturing. By hour 2, the situation had deteriorated from a tense standoff to a life-threatening medical crisis. Hayes was failing. The monitors attached to him during the flight were beeping erratic, descending rhythms. His arterial line, responsible for delivering life-saving medications directly to his heart, had kinked during the transfer. Doctor, Miller knew that if he didn't adjust that line and push a heavy dose of norepinephrine within the next few hours, the SEAL's organs would systematically shut down. "Call the MPs," Miller finally ordered, rubbing his exhausted, sweating forehead. "Get animal control, get the base commander, get anyone with a catch pole." By hour 4, Trauma Bay 4 looked less like a hospital room and more like a hostage negotiation scene. Master-at-Arms Reynolds stood by the doorway, flanked by 3 heavily armored military police officers. They held tranquilizer rifles loaded with heavy sedatives. "Dr. Miller," Reynolds said, his voice low and tight, "I need you to understand what you're asking. Titan is a Tier 1 combat assault dog. He's carrying enough adrenaline right now to kill a normal dog. If we dart him, 2 things happen. 1, the dart takes at least 90 seconds to drop him. In those 90 seconds, he will go absolutely feral. He might attack us, or worse, in his confusion he might tear out every tube keeping that SEAL alive. 2, his heart rate is so high that the sedative might just trigger a massive cardiac arrest. We'd be killing a decorated war hero. The human war hero on that bed is dying right now," Miller fired back, his composure fraying. He pointed through the glass partition at the monitor, where Hayes' blood pressure was reading a terrifying 70/40. "We have an hour, tops. If we don't fix that line, Hayes is gone. I don't want to kill the dog, Reynolds, but I will not let a Navy SEAL bleed out internally because we're afraid of a Malinois." Inside the room, the silence was deafening, broken only by the failing, steady rhythm of the machines. Titan stood frozen, his muscular frame trembling with exhaustion and pain, his amber eyes locked onto the glass partition, watching their every move. The dog was breathing heavily, a pool of his own saliva and minor drippings from his wounded snout staining the pristine white sheets covering Hayes' legs. He was a creature pushed beyond the brink, driven solely by a primal, unbreakable bond. He had lost his backup. He was in a strange, bright, chemical-smelling place. The only thing he had left in the world was the broken man beneath him, and he would die before he let another stranger touch him. Hour 5 ticked by. The base's veterinary team had tried sliding sedated meat across the floor. Titan ignored it. The MPs had tried using acoustic deterrents. Titan just growled louder, planting his paws firmer onto the mattress. Beatrice Gable paced the hallway, wringing her hands. "We've lost him," she whispered to Miller. "We're going to stand here and watch him die through a pane of glass." "Load the darts," Dr. Miller said, turning to Reynolds, his voice hollow with defeat. "We breach in 10 minutes. Aim for the dog's hindquarters. If he goes for the tubes, you use live rounds. God forgive us." As Reynolds grimly unholstered his radio to give the final order, the heavy double doors of the trauma ward swung open. Chloe Evans had been a licensed trauma nurse for exactly 32 days. At 23 years old, she was the youngest nurse on the floor, and she felt every single second of her inexperience. She was small-framed, with dark hair tightly pulled back into a regulation bun, and eyes that constantly darted around as if expecting a quiz she hadn't studied for. She had transferred to Landstuhl, hoping to make a difference, driven by a deep, unspoken personal loss that she kept buried beneath oversized scrub jackets and forced smiles. Tonight was supposed to be a standard shadowing shift. Instead, she had walked into a war zone. The moment she swiped her badge to enter the ward, the tension in the air hit her like a physical blow. The usual chaotic symphony of a trauma center, shouting doctors, clattering metal, squeaking gurneys, was entirely absent. Instead, there was a deathly, suspended silence, centered around the crowd gathered outside the glass walls of Bay 4. Chloe walked tentatively towards the group, clutching her clipboard to her chest like a shield. "Excuse me," she murmured, slipping past two heavily armed MPs who looked like they were preparing to raid a compound. She reached the front of the glass and stopped dead. Through the clear partition, she saw the massive Belgian Malinois standing over the broken body of the seal. She saw the bared teeth, the trembling muscles, the blood-stained snout. But unlike the doctors and the guards, Chloe didn't just see a vicious animal. She saw the exact angle of the dog's ears, pinned back, but twitching independently. She saw the way his weight was shifted entirely to his front left paw, protecting a hidden injury on the right. Most importantly, she saw the customized leather collar peeking through the frayed edges of the dog's tactical vest. It was a thick, double-stitched leather band with a heavy, matte black D-ring. Engraved on a small steel plate on the collar was a distinct geometric symbol, a diamond intersected by two diagonal lines. Chloe's breath hitched in her throat. The clipboard slipped from her grasp, clattering loudly against the linoleum floor. The sharp noise caused Titan's head to snap towards the glass. His amber eyes locked directly onto Chloe. For a fraction of a second, the deep, rumbling growl emanating from his chest faltered. "Nurse Evans," Beatrice Gable hissed, grabbing Chloe by the elbow and yanking her back. "What do you think you're doing? Get back to the staging area. This is a lethal situation." "Who?" Chloe stammered, her eyes wide, refusing to break eye contact with the dog through the glass. "Who is the patient?" "Chief Petty Officer Colin Hayes, Doctor," Miller said, not looking at her, his eyes glued to the plummeting numbers on the monitor. "And he's got about 5 minutes left to live. Reynolds, are your men ready?" "Ready, Doc," the MP replied, chambering a tranquilizer dart with a heavy clack. "Wait," Chloe said. Her voice was barely a whisper, but in the tense silence of the hallway, it cut through the air. "Nurse Evans, this isn't a training exercise," Beatrice scolded, her tone sharp with anxiety. "We are about to breach. Stand down." "You can't dart him," Chloe said, louder this time. She stepped away from Beatrice, her hands balling into fists at her sides. "He's a Dutch line Malinois. I recognize the specific behavioral markers. If you dart him while he's in resource guarding mode over his handler, his sympathetic nervous system will misfire. He won't just attack you, he'll thrash. He'll tear the central line out of Chief Hayes' neck before the sedative even hits his bloodstream. You will kill them both." "Doctor." Miller finally turned to look at the rookie nurse, his eyes narrowed. "And what makes you an expert in combat veterinary science, Evans?" "Because I have the actual base vet on speed dial, and he told me we have no other choice." "Because he's not just guarding," Chloe insisted, stepping closer to the glass. Titan was watching her every move, his posture rigid. "Look at his tail. It's tucked, not raised. Look at his breathing. It's shallow, panting from the diaphragm. He's not exhibiting territorial aggression. He's exhibiting catastrophic separation anxiety. He thinks Hayes is dying, and he thinks you're predators coming to finish him off. He won't let anyone with fear or aggression in their posture near him." "We don't have time for a canine psychology lesson," Miller shouted, pointing at the monitor. Hayes' blood pressure alarm began to blare a continuous, high-pitched warning tone. "He's crashing! Reynolds, go!" "Give me 2 minutes," Chloe said. Before anyone could stop her, she lunged for the handle of the heavy glass door. "Evans, stop!" Beatrice screamed. "Grab her!" Reynolds yelled to his men. But Chloe was already inside. She let the heavy door click shut behind her, sealing herself inside Trauma Bay 4. The noise of the alarms was deafening in the confined space, but Chloe blocked it out. She stood just inside the door, exactly 10 feet away from the bed. The moment she entered, Titan went ballistic. The dog reared up, planting his front paws squarely on Hayes' chest, letting out a roar that sounded more like a lion than a dog. Saliva flew from his jaws as he snapped at the air, his eyes promising violent, immediate death to the intruder. Outside the glass, Dr. Miller was pounding on the partition. Reynolds had his rifle raised, aiming directly at Titan's head, screaming at Chloe to get back. Chloe didn't look back. She kept her eyes softly focused on Titan's chest, avoiding direct eye contact, which a Malinois would interpret as a challenge. Her heart was hammering violently against her ribs, a cold sweat breaking out across her back. She knew the power of the animal in front of her. She knew that with one leap, Titan could crush her windpipe. "I know you're scared, buddy," Chloe whispered. Her voice was remarkably steady, carrying a strange melodic cadence that stood in stark contrast to the blaring alarms. Titan paused for a microsecond, his ears twitching at the tone of her voice, but he immediately resumed his aggressive barking. Chloe took a slow, deliberate breath. She reached up with her right hand and grasped the collar of her oversized scrub jacket. With a sharp pull, she unsnapped it and let it fall to the floor. Underneath, she was wearing a standard-issue short-sleeved scrub top. Slowly, deliberately, she extended her left arm straight out in front of her, palm facing up, completely exposing her inner forearm to the dog. Etched into the pale skin of her inner forearm, covering the area from her wrist to her elbow, was a massive, intricate tattoo. The ink was deep, dark black. At the center of the design was a diamond intersected by two diagonal lines, the exact symbol engraved on Titan's collar. Surrounding the diamond were complex geometric patterns used by elite European K9 handlers for visual command targeting, and woven into the bottom of the design were the words, "In memory of Staff Sergeant Liam Evans," until the final recall. Chloe didn't say a word. She just held her arm steady, the bright surgical lights illuminating the ink with perfect clarity. Then, she executed a very specific physical movement. She clicked her tongue twice against the roof of her mouth, tss, and curled her fingers inward, tapping her thumb against her index finger in a rhythmic, pulsing motion right next to the tattooed diamond. Inside the bay, the reaction was instantaneous. Titan's ferocious barking cut off so abruptly it was as if someone had pulled a plug. The massive dog froze, his jaws still slightly parted. He stared at her forearm. He blinked. Outside the glass, Reynolds lowered his rifle an inch, his jaw dropping. Dr. Miller stopped pounding on the door. The entire hallway watched in stunned, breathless disbelief. Titan slowly lowered his front paws off of Hayes' chest. His ears, previously pinned back in aggression, perked straight up into a rigid V shape. He let out a low, questioning whine that sounded impossibly small for such a dangerous animal. Chloe maintained the visual targeting sign with her fingers. She knew what this symbol meant to the dog. Liam, her older brother, had been Titan's original handler and trainer 3 years ago, before Liam was killed in action in Syria. Liam had designed that visual targeting tattoo himself. He had spent hundreds of hours training Titan to lock on to that specific symbol on his forearm for silent, high-stress commands. When a handler presented the diamond and gave the double click, it meant one thing to Titan. "Stand down, friend is here. Secure the perimeter behind me." Chloe had gotten the exact replica of her brother's targeting sleeve tattooed on her arm the week after his funeral. She never imagined it would be used like this. "Come here, Titan," Chloe whispered. Using the exact low, commanding tone her brother had taught her when she was just a teenager watching him train dogs in their backyard. "Leave it. Come." For 5 agonizing seconds, the dog didn't move. He looked down at Hayes, then back up at the tattoo on Chloe's arm. He was fighting a war inside his own mind, the primal instinct to protect his current master, battling against the deeply ingrained Pavlovian conditioning of his original beloved handler's unique command. Then, with a heavy sigh that shuddered through his entire body, Titan stepped off the gurney. He didn't walk. He dragged himself. Exhausted, bleeding, and trembling, the massive Belgian Malinois crossed the 10 feet of linoleum. He didn't approach Chloe with aggression. He approached her the way a lost child approaches a parent. He reached her legs and immediately collapsed, burying his heavy, blood-stained snout into the fabric of her scrub pants, pressing his side against her shins. He let out a long, pathetic whimper, finally surrendering the terrible burden he had carried for the last 6 hours. Chloe dropped to her knees, wrapping her arms around the dog's thick neck, burying her face in his coarse fur as tears finally spilled over her eyelashes. "I know," she sobbed quietly into his ear. "I know you tried to keep him safe. I've got him now. I promise." She looked up, her eyes blazing through the tears, and stared directly at Dr. Miller through the glass. She pointed to the heavy iron bolt on the door. "The perimeter is clear," Chloe shouted over the dog's whimpering and the blaring heart monitor. "Get in here and save this man's life." The heavy iron bolt of Trauma Bay 4 clicked back, and the doors blew open with the force of an explosion. Dr. Harrison Miller and his trauma team flooded the room, a chaotic blur of blue scrubs, shouting voices, and clattering stainless steel. Master-at-Arms Reynolds and his heavily armed men stayed outside, their weapons finally lowered, watching in stunned silence through the glass. Chloe didn't move from her spot on the linoleum. She had retreated to the far corner of the room, pressing her back against the cold tile wall, her arms wrapped tightly around Titan's trembling, muscular torso. The massive dog had buried his snout into her shoulder, his eyes squeezed shut, letting out exhausted, rhythmic huffs of air. Every time a nurse shouted or a metal tray dropped, Titan's muscles coiled to spring, but Chloe immediately applied deep pressure to his neck and hummed a low, tuneless melody, the same one her brother Liam used to hum when cleaning his canine gear. The dog would instantly melt back down against her. "I have the line! It's kinked at the subclavian insertion," Dr. Miller shouted, his hands slick as he manipulated the plastic tubing at Colin Hayes' neck. "Beatrice, push 1 milligram of epinephrine, flush it, and start a fresh bag of norepinephrine. Wide open." "Pushing EPI," Beatrice Gable responded, her hands moving with practiced, robotic efficiency, but her eyes kept darting to the corner of the room, lingering on Chloe. As a young black woman from the south side of Chicago, Chloe was profoundly used to those looks. Since arriving at Landstuhl, she had been quietly marginalized. She had graduated at the top of her nursing class, yet in this high-stakes, predominantly white and male military hierarchy, she was frequently spoken over, assigned the most menial tasks, and treated by veterans like Beatrice as a fragile diversity hire who would inevitably wash out. They looked right through her. But today, as the monitors around Hayes' bed began to emit a faster, steadier rhythm, nobody could look past her. "Blood pressure is coming up," the anesthesiologist announced, wiping sweat from his forehead. 80/50. Heart rate is stabilizing at 110. He's buying us time. "Pack the torso wounds. Get the transport board," Miller ordered, not looking up. "We are moving him to operating room 2 right now. He needs immediate surgical intervention for the internal hemorrhaging." As the team unhooked the monitors and prepared to move the gurney, the base veterinarian, Dr. Aris Bowman, slipped quietly into the room. He carried a heavy medical bag and approached the corner where Chloe sat with the canine. "Nurse Evans?" Dr. Bowman whispered, kneeling slowly, keeping his eyes averted from Titan's to avoid a dominance challenge. "I need to look at his leg and his snout. Is he going to let me?" Chloe looked down at the dog. Titan was a war machine, but right now he was just a broken, grieving animal. "Let me hold his head," she said softly. "Don't use the shears to cut his vest. The sound will trigger him. Unbuckle it." For the next 20 minutes, while Colin Hayes was rushed down the hall to fight for his life under the surgeon's knife, Chloe sat on the floor and assisted the veterinarian. She held Titan's heavy head in her lap as doctor. Bowman stitched the deep laceration across the dog's snout and splintered a fractured tibia in his hind leg. Titan whimpered when the needle pierced his skin, but Chloe just tapped her thumb against the diamond tattoo on her exposed forearm, murmuring the Dutch commands she had memorized from her brother's journals. Vast, steady. Bliff, stay. When Titan was finally bandaged and given a mild oral painkiller, he laid his heavy head across Chloe's lap and fell into a deep, exhausted sleep. Only then did Chloe look up to see Beatrice Gable standing in the doorway. The veteran nurse's face was unreadable. "The surgery is going to take hours," Beatrice said, her voice unusually subdued, lacking its typical sharp edge. "Dr. Miller wants you in the debriefing room. Base Command is here." Chloe gently rested Titan's head on a folded blanket, stood up, and brushed the dog hair from her scrub pants. She pulled her oversized jacket back on, hiding the tattooed memorial to her brother, and walked out into the corridor. Debriefing Room B was a sterile, windowless box that smelled of stale coffee and industrial floor wax. When Chloe walked in, she immediately felt the oppressive weight of authority bearing down on her. Sitting at the long conference table was Dr. Miller, still in his blood-spattered surgical scrubs, alongside Master-at-Arms Reynolds. At the head of the table sat General Thomas Sterling, the base commander, flanked by a civilian intelligence investigator named David Ross. "Have a seat, Nurse Evans," General Sterling said, his voice gravelly and devoid of warmth. Chloe sat, folding her hands tightly in her lap to hide their shaking. "Let's skip the pleasantries," the general continued, leaning forward. "You directly disobeyed a superior officer, breached a secure, lethal environment, and engaged a Tier 1 combat dog without authorization. By all military protocols, I should have you stripped of your credentials and escorted off this base. However, Dr. Miller informs me that your insubordination is the only reason Chief Petty Officer Hayes is currently breathing on an operating table." General Sterling gestured to Investigator Ross, who pushed a thick manila folder across the table. "We pulled your file, Evans," Ross said, adjusting his glasses. "We needed to know how a 23-year-old rookie nurse knew highly classified visual K9 command signals. The base vet confirmed those commands are not in any standard manual. They are custom." Chloe swallowed hard. "They were my brothers." Ross opened the folder, revealing a photograph of a smiling, broad-shouldered young man in desert fatigues. "Staff Sergeant Liam Evans, Marine Special Operations Command, lead K9 handler, killed in action during a night raid in the Syrian desert 3 years ago." "Titan was Liam's dog," Chloe said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Liam got him as a pup. He trained him from scratch. My brother, he was an artist with dogs. He believed vocal commands could be compromised in the field, so he developed a visual targeting system using tattoos. He had that diamond on his forearm. I used to watch him train Titan in our backyard before they deployed." "And you replicated the tattoo," Dr. Miller said, staring at her with a newfound respect dawning in his eyes. "The week after we buried an empty casket," Chloe confirmed, blinking back the moisture in her eyes. "I didn't know Titan survived the ambush. The military wouldn't give my family any details about the raid. They just told us Liam stepped on a secondary explosive device to shield his unit." Investigator Ross sighed heavily, exchanging a loaded glance with General Sterling. "There's a reason those details were classified, Nurse Evans," Ross said quietly. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a second folder, much thicker than the first. The name stamped on the front was Hayes, Colin. The unit your brother was attached to that night was a Navy SEAL team. They were pinned down by heavy machine gun fire. Ross slid a photograph out of Hayes' file and pushed it toward Chloe. It was a picture taken at a forward operating base. In the center of the frame stood Colin Hayes, looking younger and less scarred. Standing right beside him, with his arm slung over the SEAL's shoulder, was Liam Evans. Sitting faithfully at their feet was a younger, sleeker Titan. "Chief Hayes was the point man on that raid," Ross explained softly. "When the ambush happened, Liam took the blast to save Hayes. Your brother died in Colin Hayes' arms." Chloe stopped breathing. The sterile walls of the room seemed to close in around her. The man bleeding out on the operating table down the hall wasn't just a random soldier. He was the man her brother had died to protect. "After your brother's death, Titan went completely feral," General Sterling added, his tone softening for the first time. "He wouldn't let any other handler near him. He was slated to be euthanized for combat trauma. But Chief Hayes intervened. He fought the brass for 6 months to get recertified as a K9 handler, just so he could adopt the dog. He made a promise to your brother that he wouldn't let Titan die. Chloe stared at the photograph, her tears finally spilling over and hitting the manila folder. The twists of fate were too massive, too painful to process all at once. "There's something else you need to know about Chief Hayes," Dr. Miller said gently. He reached into a small plastic evidence bag sitting on the table, which contained the personal effects recovered from Hayes' tactical vest. He pulled out a crumpled, blood-stained Polaroid photograph. He slid it over to Chloe. It was a picture of a little girl, no older than 5, with missing front teeth, wearing a bright yellow sundress and hugging Titan's thick neck. On the back, written in clumsy crayon, were the words, "Come home soon, Daddy." "Her name is Lily," Miller said, his voice thick with emotion. "Hayes's wife passed away from leukemia 3 years ago, right around the time your brother died. He is a single father. If Hayes doesn't make it off that operating table today, that little girl loses the only family she has left, and she goes into the foster system. Titan wasn't just guarding a handler today, Chloe. He was guarding Lily's father." The silence in the room was absolute, heavy with the weight of grief, duty, and unimaginable sacrifice. Chloe traced the face of the little girl in the photograph, the echo of her own devastating loss ringing in her ears. She knew exactly what it felt like to have a soldier ripped from your life, to be left behind in the wreckage. Suddenly, the harsh buzzing of the wall-mounted intercom shattered the quiet. "Dr. Miller!" A frantic voice crackled through the speaker from operating room 2. "Dr. Miller, you need to get back here immediately. Hayes's core temperature is plummeting, and he's going into disseminated intravascular coagulation. His blood isn't clotting. We're losing him." Miller bolted from his chair, sprinting for the door. Chloe stood up, wiping her tears with the back of her hand, the fire returning to her eyes. She wasn't just a rookie nurse anymore. She was Liam's sister, and she had a debt to collect from the universe. The scrub room outside operating room 2 was a blur of frantic motion. Chloe didn't wait for an invitation or an order. She stepped up to the deep stainless steel sink, hit the foot pedal to start the scalding water, and began aggressively scrubbing her hands and forearms with iodine. The dark ink of her brother's memorial tattoo disappeared beneath the orange-brown foam. "Evans, what are you doing?" Beatrice Gable demanded, bursting through the double doors behind her. "You are a junior floor nurse. You do not have surgical clearance." Chloe didn't stop scrubbing. For years, she had survived on the grueling, chaotic floor of a 24-hour diner on the south side of Chicago. She had worked double shifts as a waitress, hoarding every crumpled dollar bill and loose quarter to pay her way through nursing school. People had looked right past her back then, treating her as invisible, a servant, someone easily underestimated, just as the veteran staff at Landstuhl did now. But waitressing in a high-stress environment had taught her a vital, unteachable skill: how to read a room, how to anticipate a catastrophic failure before the glass even hit the floor, and how to tune out the noise to focus on the objective. "Chief Hayes is going into DIC," Chloe said, her voice dropping into a register of absolute, cold authority that made Beatrice blink. "His coagulation cascade is failing. Dr. Miller has 2 hands. He needs an extra set on the suction and the retractors, while the surgical techs fetch the cryoprecipitate. I am scrubbing in." Before Beatrice could argue, the intercom buzzed again. "Gable, where is the TXA? We are drowning in here." Dr. Miller's voice was laced with pure panic. Chloe kicked the sterile OR door open, backing into the freezing, brightly lit room with her hands raised. The scene was a nightmare. Colin Hayes' massive chest and abdomen were open, held apart by steel retractors, but the cavity was rapidly filling with dark, unclotting blood. Disseminated intravascular coagulation was a trauma surgeon's worst fear. The body's clotting mechanisms go into overdrive, consuming all available platelets until there is nothing left. causing the patient to bleed out from every capillary and wound simultaneously. "Suction! Get in here!" Miller yelled, his gloves slick, his fingers blindly pinching off a torn mesenteric artery. Chloe stepped to the table. She grabbed the plastic suction tube, maneuvering it past Miller's wrists with the deft, fluid precision of someone completely in their element. As the blood cleared for a fraction of a second, she stared down into the wreckage of the Navy SEAL's body. "What happened to him?" Chloe asked, her eyes darting to the monitor. Hayes' blood pressure was dropping dangerously low again. Investigator Ross, who had suited up and was observing from the corner of the OR, answered grimly. "Camp Lemonnier, staging. The op was a raid on a subterranean warlord's prison outside Mogadishu. Hayes' team was sent to extract 2 kidnapped aid workers. They breached the prison, got the hostages out, but the warlord's men trapped them in the courtyard. They used a rocket-propelled grenade. Hayes threw himself over the hostages. He shielded them," Chloe thought, her throat tightening, just like Liam shielded him. "He's bradycardic," the anesthesiologist shouted. "Heart rate is dropping into the 40s. He's hypervolemic. We're pumping O-negative as fast as the Belmont infuser can push it, but it's leaking straight out of his vascular bed." "Give me the TEG results," Miller demanded, referring to the thrombolastography test that measured the efficiency of blood coagulation. "TEG shows 0 clot strength," Beatrice reported, running into the room with thick plastic bags of pale yellow fluid, hanging the fresh frozen plasma and cryoprecipitate now. "It's not going to be fast enough," Dr. Miller said, his voice dropping. It was the sound of a surgeon admitting defeat. "The shrapnel shredded his liver. I can't pack it fast enough. He's bleeding out." Chloe watched the monitors. She watched the life draining from the man who had held her dying brother. She thought of the little girl in the yellow dress. She thought of Titan, lying exhausted on the cold floor down the hall. No, Chloe thought. Not today. The universe doesn't get to take another one from this family. "Doctor," Chloe said, her eyes narrowing as she looked into the abdominal cavity. "Stop looking at the liver." "Excuse me," Miller snapped, his stress boiling over. "Nurse Evans, the hepatic vein is lacerated." "Look at the color of the blood pooling in the lower quadrant," Chloe insisted, refusing to back down, her suction wand hovering over the right side of Hayes' abdomen. "It's not dark venous blood. It's bright red. It's arterial." Miller paused, squinting through his surgical loops. "The RPG blast," Chloe continued rapidly, piecing the puzzle together. "If he shielded someone from a blast, the primary concussive wave would have hit his chest plate, but the secondary fragmentation would have traveled upward from the concrete floor of the prison courtyard." She gently but firmly moved Miller's hand aside and aimed the suction wand deep into the retroperitoneal space, right near the right kidney. As the blood cleared, a jagged, rusted piece of casing from the RPG became visible, wedged directly against the renal artery. It was slicing the artery open with every beat of Hayes' heart. "Son of a gun," Miller breathed, his eyes widening. "She's right. The liver is a secondary bleed. This is the primary source." "Clamps!" Miller roared, his energy suddenly returning. "Evans, hold that retractor steady. Do not move a millimeter." For the next 2 hours, the operating room was a synchronized dance of desperate survival. Chloe held the heavy steel retractors until her arms screamed with lactic acid burn. She didn't flinch. She kept her eyes locked on the rhythmic pulsing of the renal artery as Dr. Miller painstakingly repaired the horrific damage caused by the shrapnel. They pumped Colin Hayes full of synthetic clotting factors, warm plasma, and enough whole blood to replace his total volume twice over. The young, single father was fighting with every ounce of his legendary physical endurance, but the human body has limits. At 21:40 hours, just as Dr. Miller placed the final suture on the liver capsule, the harsh, shrill tone of the cardiac monitor sliced through the room. "Beep!" "Vifib!" the anesthesiologist screamed. "He's in ventricular fibrillation. He's coding!" "Paddles!" Miller shouted, stepping back from the table. Beatrice rushed forward with the internal defibrillator paddles, small spoon-like electrodes designed to be placed directly on the exposed heart muscle. But Hayes's chest wasn't fully open. They had only cracked the lower sternum to access the upper abdomen. "We don't have access for internal," Beatrice cried out. "Charge the external pads to 200 joules. "Oh," Miller ordered, ripping the sterile drapes away from Hayes' chest. Chloe's heart slammed against her ribs. She watched as Beatrice slapped the adhesive pads onto the SEAL's bruised and battered chest. "Clear," Miller shouted. The machine violently shocked Hayes' body. He convulsed on the table, a sudden arch of muscle and bone, before slamming back down onto the mattress. They all snapped their heads to the monitor. Nothing. A flat, jagged, green line. "Push 1 milligram of EPI. Charge to 300, Miller yelled, panic truly setting in now. "Come on, Colin, don't do this. Clear." Another violent shock. Another agonizing silence. The monitor remained flat. "Pushing atropine," the anesthesiologist said, his voice hollow. "It's been 3 minutes, doctor." "Charge to 360. Maximum juice," Miller barked, sweat pouring down his face, dripping onto his scrubs. At that exact moment, a sound echoed down the sterile hallway outside the operating room. It was a sound that made the hair on the back of Chloe's neck stand straight up. It wasn't a bark. It wasn't a growl. It was a long, mournful, devastating howl. Titan had woken up. Despite his splintered leg and the heavy sedatives flowing through his system, the massive Belgian Malinois had dragged himself out of Trauma Bay 4. He had crawled down the polished linoleum corridor, leaving a faint trail of blood, until he reached the heavy double doors of OR2. The dog couldn't see inside. He couldn't hear the monitor. But somehow, through the inexplicable, primal tether that binds a combat dog to its handler, Titan knew. He felt the absence of the life force he was sworn to protect. The howl pierced the walls of the operating room, cutting through the sterile hum of the machines. It was a sound of absolute, unbearable heartbreak. Chloe looked at the flatline on the monitor. She thought of her brother, dying in the dirt of the Syrian desert. She thought of Lily, the little girl in the yellow dress, waiting for a phone call that would shatter her world. "No," Chloe whispered. She dropped the retractor. She shoved past Beatrice and stepped right up to the head of the operating table. "Evans, get back," Miller shouted. Chloe ignored him. She leaned directly over Colin Hayes' face. She reached her hands down, grabbing the lapels of his blood-soaked tactical undershirt that they hadn't fully cut away. "Colin Hayes!" Chloe screamed, her voice tearing through the OR, shockingly loud, carrying the furious authority of a commanding officer. "You listen to me! You do not get to quit!" The entire surgical team froze, staring at the rookie nurse as if she had lost her mind. "You made a promise to my brother," Chloe yelled, tears streaming down her face, her hands shaking as she gripped the fabric of his shirt. "You promised Liam you would take care of his dog. You promised your daughter you would come home. Do you hear him out there? Titan is waiting for you. Lily is waiting for you. You do not have permission to die." She slammed her fist down on the center of his sternum, a precordial thump, delivered with every ounce of desperate, grief-fueled strength she possessed. "Charge it again!" Chloe screamed at Miller. "Hit him!" Dr. Miller, jolted out of his shock by the sheer, terrifying intensity of the young nurse, slammed his thumb onto the discharge button. "Clear!" The 360 joules of electricity blasted through Hayes' chest. His massive frame vaulted off the surgical table, hovering in the air for a fraction of a second before crashing back down. Silence descended on the room. Titan's howl outside the door faded into a pathetic, ragged whimper. Chloe stared at the monitor, holding her breath, her tears freezing on her cheeks. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. Then a small, sharp spike appeared on the green line. Beep. The anesthesiologist gasped. Another spike. Beep. Then another, slightly faster. Beep, beep, beep. "We have a rhythm," the anesthesiologist whispered, staring at the screen in pure disbelief. Sinus bradycardia! He's converting! We have a pulse!" Dr. Miller collapsed against the surgical table, letting out a breath that sounded like a sob. Beatrice Gable dropped the defibrillator paddles, burying her face in her hands. Chloe slowly let go of Hayes' shirt. She took a step back, her legs trembling so violently she nearly collapsed. She looked down at the bruised, pale face of the Navy SEAL. His chest was rising and falling. It was weak. It was assisted by a machine. But he was alive. Outside the heavy OR doors, Titan let out one final sharp bark, and then the hallway went completely silent. The intensive care unit at Landstuhl Regional Medical Center was a sanctuary of hushed voices. 4 days had passed since the chaotic hours in Operating Room 2. Outside Room 412, the heavily armed military police were gone. In their place, Titan rested on a thick orthopedic mat, his right hind leg heavily casted. The terrifying resource guarding that nearly got him killed on the tarmac had vanished. His amber eyes were calm. Chloe Evans sat beside the hospital bed. She was off the clock, but she refused to leave. She wore a soft grey sweater pushed up to her elbows, the black ink of the diamond and diagonal lines clearly visible on her left forearm. In the bed, Chief Petty Officer Colin Hayes looked like he'd survived a war zone, but his breathing was steady. Suddenly, a sharp intake of breath hissed from the mattress. Colin's heavy eyelids fluttered. The sudden influx of consciousness brought an overwhelming wave of pain, but his first instinct wasn't to call out for help. His scarred hand blindly reached out towards the edge of the mattress, searching the empty air. Titan didn't need a command. The massive dog hobbled to the bed and rested his bandaged snout directly into Colin's open palm. "Good boy, T," Colin rasped, his voice like crushed gravel. He opened his eyes fully, blinking against the harsh lights. His gaze tracked past the IV pole and settled on the young woman at the foot of his bed. He looked at her dark hair, the intense set of her eyes, and then his gaze dropped to her left forearm. He saw the black ink, the diamond. Colin's breath hitched, his heart monitor spiked violently. "You have his eyes," he choked out, a single tear slipping through the stubble on his cheek. "Liam!" Chloe gripped the bed rail, the lump in her throat too massive to speak. "I'm so sorry," the hardened warrior wept, breaking down completely in the sterile room. "He shoved me into the trench. He took the blast. It should have been me in that box." "Stop!" Chloe said fiercely, stepping to his side and taking his trembling hand. "Liam didn't die, so you could carry his ghost. He made a trade, Colin. He knew you had a little girl waiting at home. If you let the guilt destroy you, you're throwing away the life my brother bought for you." Colin stared up at her, seeing the exact unyielding stubbornness that had made Liam Evans the best K-9 handler in the Marines. Weakly, he looked at veteran nurse Beatrice Gable, who was checking his IV lines. "My gear, in the lockbox, please." Minutes later, Beatrice returned and handed Colin a small, clear bag. He pressed it into Chloe's palm. Inside, caked with the dust of a foreign desert, was a silver beaded chain holding 2 stamped metal dog tags. "Evans, Liam." "I pulled them off him in the medevac chopper in Syria," Colin whispered. "I've carried them inside my vest on every drop since. I promised myself I'd find you to give them back." Chloe clutched the dog tags to her chest, a profound sob finally breaking free. The crushing weight of 3 years of unanswered questions began to dissolve. Before she could speak, a high-pitched cry pierced the hallway. "Daddy!" Bursting through the doorway was a tiny 5-year-old tornado in a bright yellow sundress. "Lily!" "Titan!" she shrieked, dropping her stuffed toy. Titan hobbled forward, burying his massive head into her little chest, whining and licking her face as she wrapped her tiny arms around his thick neck. Then, Lily scrambled onto the step stool next to the bed, incredibly careful of the tubes, and pressed her cheek against Colin's uninjured shoulder. "You came back. You promised." "I promised, baby girl," Colin wept, wrapping his heavy arm around her. "Daddy's right here." Chloe took a step back, wiping her eyes as she watched the beautiful family reassemble themselves. As she turned to slip out the door, a heavy, warm pressure leaned against her leg. Titan pushed his bandaged snout firmly into her palm, right over her brother's dog tags, and gave her hand one long, affectionate lick. "The pack is safe," Chloe smiled, giving his ears a final scratch. She walked out into the busy hallway. She wasn't an invisible rookie anymore. She was Nurse Chloe Evans, and she had a shift to start. If this story of unbreakable loyalty, unbelievable twists of fate, and the fierce bond between a canine, a Navy SEAL, and a dedicated nurse moved your heart, please hit that like button right now. Stories like Titan and Chloe's remind us that heroes don't just wear camouflage. Sometimes they wear scrubs, and sometimes they wear fur and tactical collars. The sacrifices made by our military families, both human and animal, are profound and life-changing. If you want to hear more intense, real-life dramatic stories of survival, love, and the incredible karma of the universe coming full circle, subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Who was your favorite hero in this story? Titan the loyal K9, Colin the dedicated father, or Chloe the fearless nurse? Drop a comment down below and share your thoughts. Share this video with someone who loves dogs, loves a powerful medical drama, or just needs a reminder today that even in our darkest hours, the universe has a way of putting exactly who we need, exactly where we need them. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for the next incredible true story.